Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Very little up till now has seemed to slow the march toward autonomous vehicles. However, in a letter sent recently to the U.S. Department of Transportation, a group of unions made the case for slowing or even stopping that march. One of the unions on the letter was the Transportation Workers Union International. I'll speak with that union's president, John Samuelson. When most people get into trucking, they likely expect driving to be the biggest part of the job. But for those who start their own trucking businesses, paperwork becomes a very big part of their lives as well, including keeping basic records. I'll talk with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, a bill in Florida would further restrict who can use the left lanes when. Scott Thompson discusses that, as well as two states looking at move-over rules, with our state legislative expert, Keith Goble. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. The decline in diesel prices continues. For a fifth straight week, the national average on the Energy Information Administration's weekly report was down compared to the week before. The agency says diesel prices fell more than 6 cents last week to $4.14 a gallon. The average dipped in all 10 regions on the EIA survey, led by the Midwest, where prices were down more than 9 cents. It's more of the same this week, according to the latest numbers from ProMiles.com, which had Tuesday's average at $4.18 nationally. That's down 7 cents compared to a week ago at this time. And just as with the EIA report, prices were down on the ProMiles report in all 10 regions, with the Midwest leading the way as well, with a price drop of 10 cents. There was a large drop in overall load volume last week due to the Thanksgiving holiday. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has more details.
Last week was a shorter shipping week due to Thanksgiving. Robert Rouse at DAT says a lot of manufacturers took an extended weekend and didn't ship for 4 days, which made it the slowest week in the past 7 years, with around 526,000 loads.
We fully expect the load volume to rebound this week with a full shipping week, back up to something a little more normal than what we'd see. And when we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they also decreased by around 31%, down to 266,000 trucks. This is fully expected during a holiday week. However, the good news is this is a similar volume to what we typically see for this time of year over the last 7 years. So not quite at the same dip as we saw with the overall load volume. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw loaded truck ratios decrease slightly across all three equipment types. Even since it was a holiday week with a shortened shipping period, we expected to see a reduction in overall freight volume, so nothing was a surprise there. I think the one thing that we can take away is that the freight market is still pretty soft based on the overall loads, with a relatively strong number of trucks.
Rouse says with diesel continuing to go down, we are now at the lowest weekly price since the last week of July. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Time is running out to submit comments on possible changes to the way a motor carrier safety fitness is determined. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in August, asking for feedback on whether the safety fitness determination process needs to be revised. The public has through Wednesday, November 29th to comment. FMCSA says the intent of the move is to more effectively identify unfit motor carriers so they can be removed from the nation's roadways. Right now, a safety fitness determination is given to a trucking company only after a compliance review is conducted. The process only reaches a small percentage of motor carriers. FMCSA's advance notice of proposed rulemaking includes a dozen questions aimed at helping the agency craft a proposal. As of this morning, more than 140 comments had been filed on the regulations.gov website. To comment yourself before the deadline, we've got a link at landlinenow.com. The Biden administration launched a new council on Monday aimed at strengthening the U.S. supply chain. The White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience is made up of numerous cabinet members, including Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Their mission is to develop strategies to help the U.S. move goods from point A to point B. The council was conceived during the pandemic when supply chain problems ran rampant. And while the bottlenecks and issues that plagued the economy then have subsided and inflationary pressures have eased in recent months, President Biden said American consumers need, quote, more breathing room to make ends meet. The president said the new Supply Chain Council will make the coordination and delivery of goods more efficient, which in turn will bring down costs. A total of 30 policy initiatives were launched to help achieve that goal. The group also plans to complete a comprehensive review of the supply chain by the end of 2024. Meanwhile, the White House also launched an Office of Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy within the DOT on Monday. It's part of the broader plan to improve supply chains. The White House says the office will oversee the maintenance and improvement of the nation's freight network and supply chains. It will also continue the advancement of the U.S. DOT's Freight Logistics Optimization Works, or FLOW program, which is meant to help American businesses get goods to shelves faster and cut costs for consumers. FLOW includes the 5 largest U.S. container ports, 7 of the largest ocean carriers, and 4 of the 5 largest retailers by imports in the United States. Together, they share information on supply chain networks and facilitate a more reliable flow of goods. Allison Dane Camden, a former official with the Washington State Department of Transportation, will lead the office, which was created as part of the infrastructure law. The week got started much like the weekend ended, with another pileup on a U.S. roadway due to weather conditions. Up to 30 vehicles were involved in the latest, many of them semis. It happened on Interstate 86 near Pocatello, Idaho, Monday morning. The Idaho State Police say the area was overcome with a dense layer of freezing fog leading up to the crash, with temperatures in the single digits. Troopers say traffic slowed as they encountered the fog bank, leading to multiple chain reaction crashes. Several people were hurt. None of those injuries appear to be life-threatening. I-86 was closed for about 7 hours following the wreck, but has since reopened. A truck driver is facing charges after being accused of stealing and then selling 33,000 pounds of frozen chicken. The Sumter County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina says they arrested Christopher Thomas over the weekend. They say Thomas was hired by Pilgrim's Pride to deliver 41,000 pounds of frozen chicken, valued at about $80,000, from Sumter, South Carolina, to 2 locations in Milton, Georgia. Working off a tip, the Sheriff's Office performed a traffic stop and discovered just 8,000 pounds of that chicken left in the trailer. They believe Thomas sold the rest at various locations along the way. He was arrested and at last check was still being held on bond. Saia has snatched up another terminal. This one's in southwestern Ohio. The Dayton Daily News was first to report on the $2.9 million purchase. The terminal in Riverside is the 8th one Saia has opened this year, bringing the company's total nationwide to nearly 200. The less-than-truckload carrier has been expanding in recent months and years. Saia opened up at least 11 new freight terminals last year. And finally, Schneider National is celebrating a milestone. In a news release, the carrier said its battery electric vehicle fleet has logged more than 1 million zero-emission miles and counting. That's between the roughly 100 Freightliner E-Cascadias Schneider currently has deployed, most of them operating out of Southern California. The 1 million-mile milestone was reached in under a year. Schneider's first electric trucks began hauling freight in January for customers that include Goodyear and Frito-Lay. It's part of their goal to reduce per-mile emissions by 7.5% by the year 2025, a goal Schneider says it's halfway now to attaining. The goal by the year 2035 is to reduce those per-mile emissions by 60%. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, I'll speak with Transportation Workers Union International President John Samuelson about autonomous vehicles. I'll discuss record-keeping for your taxes with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And Scott Thompson covers a left lane bill in Florida with state expert Keith Goble. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. more miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Very little up till now has seemed to slow the march toward autonomous vehicles. However, in a letter sent recently to the U.S. Department of Transportation, a group of unions made the case for slowing or even stopping that march. One of the unions on the letter was the Transportation Workers Union International. I spoke recently with that union's president, John Samuelson, about the letter and the union's concerns regarding autonomous vehicles. Well, this is concerning the union's letter to the U.S. Department of Transportation regarding autonomous vehicles. I'm wondering if you can start kind of broadly and tell us what the overall message of the letter that your union and the others sent to the U.S. DOT was.
So the overall message of the letter is that the U.S. DOT needs to crack down on autonomous vehicles. It's simply a time where the federal government needs to intervene and ensure that the deployment of autonomous vehicles doesn't cause harm to working people. And certainly our position has been all along that the promulgation of autonomous vehicles has not been for any other purpose other than to make money for technology stockholders, for those who have invested in tech stocks, and to displace workers. It has nothing to do with anything else.
What other unions have signed on to the letter?
Every union in the transport sector has signed on to the letter.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can go into some more details in terms of what the union's chief concerns are with autonomous vehicles. I know that safety was a big one.
So the major thrust of the letter is all about safety. It's all about the DOT clamping down on unfettered implementation of the use of autonomous vehicles, as we've seen in California and elsewhere. So we believe, and certainly our concerns have been proven out, that states like California, governors like Gavin Newsom, who have just catered to the investors that want to deploy autonomous vehicles in the street and who are essentially using working people in America as guinea pigs while they perfect this technology. So we want the federal government to step in, intervene, regulate these companies, prevent the states from allowing these companies to deploy vehicles on the street until they meet a framework that has a high amount of regulation, and we know that they're not going to pose a danger to other vehicles and pedestrians and workers. It's pretty simple, actually, and it's pretty logical.
I know that your letter cited some of the incidents that have occurred with autonomous cars, especially in San Francisco, where we've had some accidents involving pedestrians and accidents or incidents where they blocked emergency vehicles. Are there other concerns beyond that, or are those the main ones?
So from a safety perspective, it makes absolute sense that the autonomous vehicles are not ripe. They're not ready for prime time. They're going to cause nothing but problems. They're going to cause nothing but heartache, in fact. By the time that they're ready to go, by the time that the technology is ready for prime time, they're going to leave a trail of heartache behind them. Just in terms of their interaction with emergency service vehicles alone, even if they don't cause death, they're going to block fire trucks, they're going to block police trucks, they're going to block ambulances, they're going to block any kind of public service that goes off route. And just in terms of nuisance, they're going to block public transit vehicles. They're going to block they're going to interfere with any kind of construction, be it public transit construction or be it just new building construction, any kind of lane closures on highways. They're not prepared to do that. They're not prepared to interact in an urban environment right now that's a living, breathing environment. So until that kind of thing is figured out, they can't be deployed in a way that's safe. So when I say a trail of heartache, it's not a great leap, and we've seen it. It's not a great leap to understand that an autonomous vehicle that gets in the way of an ambulance that's transporting a heart attack patient to an emergency room is going to cause death. These are things that are going to happen and have been happening. So the safety concerns are enormous, but also if you look at the federal statement on implementation of this type of technology, this type of technology has got to come with workers first. It has to come with a worker first mentality, and a worker first mentality means that these autonomous vehicles that are being deployed and the states that are allowing them to be deployed have to protect the interests of workers. They can't just be deployed recklessly without any regard for support for workers that are going to be displaced, without any planning for workers that are going to be displaced. So this has the potential to be like the second coming of NAFTA, just along a different track. Whether we're talking about over the road tractor trailer deliveries, or ultimately with which we've successfully fought back so far, and we've fought it back, working very carefully with this current administration. Ultimately, if these vehicles find their way into public transit, imagine the impact if those who are developing this technology had their way and they were able to start replacing bus operators with this automated technology. The economic impact on the working communities of America would just be enormous. These bus operated jobs, for instance, are the type of jobs that are the bedrock of communities all across America. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs that are the economic foundation of our churches, of our communities. They're the tax foundation of working neighborhoods in every state in the country. So the federal government needs to step in and put the deployment of autonomous vehicles in check on across a whole bunch of different levels.
Was there a particular incident or a particular action on the part of federal agencies or these companies that spurred the unions to send the letter at this time?
Well, I think the most recent accidents in California were just disastrous. I think that was the latest. But we've been agitating about this for years. So we've seen the latest accidents in California. With the dragging with a vehicular accident where the autonomous vehicle, a cruise vehicle, just dragged a person to their death, and it didn't stop. It just continued down the lane that it was programmed to go down. And that is such an enormous problem. These vehicles are programmed, and they don't want to stop. They don't want to stop for anything that's not in their program, which is why it's such a horrific problem when you're dealing with things like emergency service vehicles, whether it be police, fire, or ambulance, or other emergency situations. These vehicles are programmed, and at that point where they all they want to do is fulfill their program. So they don't care if there's an ambulance with a pregnant woman in the ambulance, for instance. They're just they feel obligated to fulfill their route. That's their mission. They don't care if there's a heart attack victim in between them and their programmed mission, and it makes them a disaster. And until those type of things are overcome, and that type of scourge virus is out of the system of these automated vehicles, they just simply cannot be deployed in such a reckless fashion on the streets of America, and particularly urban America, densely populated areas. They're just not conducive to modern American life at this moment in time.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the union thinks should be done regarding these vehicles. You've referred to this a little bit up to this point, but what sort of regulations would the union propose, for example, that the federal government institute?
So across the history of transportation, there are just the safety programs that are in place in every mode of transportation. Federal regulations across the board have a very layered approach to safety. There's reporting and feedback and data collection that allows the federal government to carefully implement and then give more freedom to the manufacturers and to the implementers, and if so, the utilizers of the technology, whether they be public agencies or private companies utilizing the technology, so that type of in-depth oversight, from reporting on accidents, reporting on incidents and accidents, and data collection, all of that stuff needs to be put into place. The same exact type of stuff that's in place right now in the airline industry, in the public transit industry, in the railroad industry. There's no reason why the automated vehicle industry shouldn't be subjected to the same exact strenuous reporting and data collection requirements that are in place right now. And in fact, it should be more, because this is just it's kind of like this brave new world of scariness that is out there right now.
Where do you think the use of these vehicles is appropriate at this point in time? I mean, where should they be at this point?
I don't think the use of these vehicles is appropriate in any way whatsoever. But perhaps on a proving ground, in a testing ground somewhere, in an enclosed environment, they certainly should not be utilized on public streets where there are pedestrians. They absolutely cannot be utilized in that regard. They have no ability to be trusted in any kind of environment where there are pedestrians walking about, where there are pedestrians whose behavior is unpredictable. They cannot be trusted in any environment where there are emergency service vehicles around, construction sites, anything that is not pegged. And these autonomous vehicles are not designed at this point, or cannot be trusted to safely operate in any manner whatsoever when anything deviates from the programmed grid that it's operating on. And therefore they cannot be used in any kind of urban environment. They have to be used they should only be used right now, I guess, to cut to the chase of your question. Right now, until this technology is furthered, until it's made more precise, they should only be used right now on a proving ground. They're not ready for prime time.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add, or that maybe I didn't ask about you think I should have?
I mean, the only thing I would want to add is that this is now just yet another quintessential example of the pursuit of profit over the safety of the American people. There's no other explanation that makes sense when tech investors or budget bean counters are allowed to deploy these vehicles in the hopes of eliminating workers that currently drive vehicles, or the hope of making money off of tech stocks, or getting public agencies to buy up all these tech gadgets in order that Wall Street make money, and that public agencies can cut they can cut headcount by replacing vehicles currently operated by human beings, by workers with automated technology. There's no way that should be allowed. And so it's the pursuit of profit. It should not be allowed at the risk of the safety of the American people.
Okay. Mr. Samuelson, thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate it. That was John Samuelson, president of the Transportation Workers Union International, talking about a letter sent by his union and 25 others regarding the push toward autonomous vehicles. You can read more about the letter or find a link to it at landline.media. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
When most people get into trucking, they likely expect driving to be the biggest part of the job. But for those who start their own trucking businesses, paperwork becomes a very big part of their lives as well. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Rettig. Welcome back to the program. A big part of the paperwork that any owner-operator has to deal with relates to taxes, specifically the federal and state income taxes due on April 15th every year. A great deal of that involves bookkeeping, but in addition to that, record keeping is vitally important to anyone filing federal income tax. You might think those are the same thing, but they're not. And to clear it all up, I talked with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. Let's talk about record keeping. And the first thing I think that we have to do, Shasta, is I think a lot of people hear that and they think we're talking about bookkeeping. What do we mean by record keeping, and how does it differ from bookkeeping?
Record keeping is how you log, store, and dispose of important financial information for your business. Records are your source documents, both physical and electronic, that show your business transactions and the dates of those transactions, the amounts of those transactions. That would include contracts for whether those are loans, equipment transactions, any legal documents. These are all your business details, and these records, these are crucial records.
When we talk about these records, give us a few examples, if you would.
Well, when we're talking about records, what should my record keeping include? Like I said, copies of all business transactions, and the transactions are reflected on multiple areas. They're reflected on your settlements, your bank statements, your credit card statements, your receipts, invoices, sales slips, contracts for equipment transactions. I mean, anytime you buy, sell, or trade, you've got to hold on to the paperwork that reflects date, amount, transaction. And then any business loans, whether that's an SBA loan, whether that's a loan for capital for the business, these are all the records that I'm talking about when I'm talking about record keeping. And a lot of times people don't realize lost records are lost deductions as well. And lost deductions are lost money. So it's very important for the business to have all these documents.
What are ways that you can organize these records? I mean, it's one thing to keep them, but we always have talked about the shoebox full of receipts that some people show up to their tax preparer with. And obviously that's not an ideal situation. So talk, if you would, about different ways that people can organize these records so that they can access them later on when they do need them.
Well, you need to have some type of document management system in place. And there's two main ways to keep these business records, and they are manual record keeping and computerized, automated record keeping. So manually, when we say manually, we're talking about the shoebox, the accordion folder, the 3-ring binder. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it's something that you can keep hold of these records. You can always record them and put them in a computer system or a record keeping system down the line. But the most important thing is to keep them and figure out a system that works for you, where you keep a hold of these records. It also is digitally, where you can save documents, that are emailed to you, whether this is your settlements, your bank statements. You're saving these documents to files, whether you're scanning in receipts and other important paperwork that that you're going to need to have. You need to spend the time setting up some kind of system that you can stick to. And most important is to set aside a regular time, whether that's every week or every month, to deal with this kind of administrative, boring, tedious thing that just has to be done.
Okay. How long should you keep these records? I mean, I know that you need to keep them, obviously, until you're filing taxes based on them. But I know also that some people like to keep those records for a bit longer. Give us an idea of how long you should keep them and why you need to keep them that long.
The very minimum with things reflected on your tax return is 3 years from the date filed. I really prefer to err on the side of caution and would want you to keep those records a bit longer. I think 5 years is a reasonable time that those should be kept. Any contracts, legal documents, I would keep longer. Any contracts on any assets that you have, your equipment, you want to keep those for the length of the equipment and even for a little bit after that equipment is sold, traded, whatever, I would still hang on to those records. The IRS can audit a tax return going back 3 years, but if for some reason they feel that there is some type of fraud, they can go back, as far as they want. So you just always want to err on the side of caution and keep those records for an additional year or two at least, but minimum 3 on tax records and things reflected on your tax return. And with equipment, assets for the length that you have that asset plus 1 year is my recommendation. And you really want to store these things safely as well. That's important too.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think safety, you want to have safety when you're storing these records. Even if you choose to keep all your records electronically, it's so vital that you keep like a regular electronic backup. I would recommend having a paper copy as well elsewhere if possible. There's nothing that makes me happier than when someone has an audit and they have everything that we need, because the IRS is like the house in Vegas. They're always the winner. The odds are always with them, not with you. And so many times, a poor taxpayer, this poor guy, he's lost his records. It's a challenge for me to find something from 3 years ago, and I'm really good at this, and I lose things. And so for someone who that is not their focus of their entire world, it's hard for me, and that's my focus, and I still lose things. So you've really got to treat these records like they're gold, because they're so important and can save you so much money. Because if the IRS audits you and lets it, every single deduction on your return is legitimate, but you don't have the backup, the document, the substantiation, they can say none of it's real and that you made it all up because you've lost your records. And that would be the most heartbreaking, awful thing to see happen to somebody. So it's so important you keep the documentation.
And of course, in a case like that, you're then going to owe tax almost on your gross.
Yes. And don't forget the penalties they'll assess, on that money going back from the day you owed it. And they always wait till it's been at least, 2.5, 3 years when they start looking at you. So you really want to protect yourself. Make security a priority. Those records, they're your business. They're your life. They're your income. They're everything that you've devoted your life to year after year. So treat them like they're a separate person and take really good care of them and make sure they're always safe and accounted for.
Now, we've talked a lot about the business side of this and all the different records like equipment information, canceled checks, bank and credit card statements, and so on, and receipts and so on. But that's all on the business side. And a lot of these folks that we're talking about are sole proprietors. They basically are the business. Is there personal stuff that they should be keeping among those records?
Yes. When you're filing a tax return, when you're a sole proprietor, your business income and expenses are reported as part of your personal return. When you're involved in, say, a partnership or multi-member LLC or corporation, then you're filing a separate return for the business, and then that income is reported on your personal return. So on the personal side, these records are just as important. And those records typically are going to include if you're receiving a mortgage interest statement, property taxes. If you've given charitable contributions, you want to keep those records. If you have children and you pay for childcare, you want those childcare records, all the things that are going to be deducted on that tax return. And again, this is substantiation for what's on a return. And they don't necessarily, once they're looking at a return, they're not necessarily going to stick to just the business side of it. They may start looking at everything. So you want to make sure that you've got that backup, those records for every single thing on that tax return.
Shasta, where do people typically fall short in this area? What are the typical problems people run into with record keeping?
I think there's a lot of different things. I think a lot of times when there are purchases, whether that is a home purchase or an equipment purchase, a lot of times the contracts, sales agreements, whatever those are not necessarily kept. They're somewhere, but it's finding them. And we don't want you to have to panic and come in off the road because you can't remember where you put that purchase agreement or where that bill of sale is from that old that old trailer you sold. We've got to have these records. Any transaction is important, is a business transaction when you're self-employed. A lot of things that people forget to do is a lot of us take the vehicle miles, the business miles we put on our personal vehicle. So when you're off the road and you're home, but you're still having to do a lot of running around, whether that's to do banking, picking up truck parts, whatever that is, you're allowed to take a deduction for all those miles you're putting on your personal vehicle. And to be able to do that, we have to have you take an odometer reading every year so that we know, number one, how many miles you put on that vehicle for the year. And then also you need to be keeping track of all the business miles you put on the vehicle. So I need to report, for the year you put 9,600 miles, and of those 9,600, 2,003 were business miles. But you need to keep a little notebook or some kind of little diary in the glove box saying, okay, this date I went to the bank, it was this many miles. This date I went to pick up truck parts, etc. So that's an important thing that a lot of people miss out on. I think is one of the top things. A lot of people out there have SBA loans, and they have to scramble to try to figure out what the interest was, say, on that SBA loan. That was a business loan that was used for the business. We need to know that interest, what that was, and we can get a write-off, as well as with any equipment loans. You pay a lot of interest on those equipment loans. So every year we can take that interest as a separate deduction from the depreciation that we're taking on that equipment.
Well, Shasta, is there anything else on this topic that you want to include or that I didn't ask about I should have?
No, I think I just wanted to get out there that record keeping is so important. And believe me, I know better than anyone how tedious it is. And it's the last thing you want to do when you have a little bit of downtime, but it is so worth it. You are taking care of your business in the details. You really are. It's like your baby. So you want to take as good a care of it as possible.
Okay, Shasta, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about record keeping. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. Again, that phone number is 1-888-407-1669. The email address is smay@mbataxhelp.com, or you can go to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box, and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back to Landline Now, where we have just enough time now to run through a few states making changes that could end up affecting you out on the roadways. Keith Goble of Landline Magazine joins us now, and Keith has left lane changes on the brain. Keith, how you doing?
Always, Scott. Always on the brain.
It's constantly on your brain. We'll also get into a couple states making changes to move over laws here in just a moment, but let's start with Florida and a bill that would amend the left lane law there. First off, Keith, what's the law there now in Florida? And what's this change looking like?
Currently, those folks who are traveling, if they're driving, I don't want to say quote unquote too slow, but if you're going below the posted speed and you're out in the left lane, obviously we're talking about multi-lane highways. If you reasonably should know that you're being overtaken by another vehicle, Florida law says get over to the right so the other vehicles can pass. And even traveling the speed limit, you're required to yield, get over for a vehicle that's exceeding the posted speed limit. And I recall back whenever there was pursuit at the State House to adopt this rule. I mean, that was one of the concerns is so you're going to be requiring people who are driving the speed limit to get over for folks who are, in excess of the speed limit. But yeah, they're trying to reduce possible road rage incidents and just keep the left lane clear is absolutely as much as possible. There is a specific rule, obviously, for truck drivers who travel in Florida are aware of it. Trucks are prohibited from traveling out in the left lane, or I guess they also consider that the inside travel lanes along rural stretches of interstate, as long as those rural stretches have at least 3 lanes in one direction. Trucks they're supposed to stay out of the left lane. And for trucks, the minimum violation or the minimum fine for a violation is over $120. For the previous rule that we were talking about that applies to all vehicles, the fine is at least $75. So you have that disparity in fine amounts. But you've got pursuit that is underway for, as we get closer to 2024, for whenever the Florida legislature is back in session, that would specifically restrict drivers from hanging out in the left lane. So even if nobody's trying to pass you in the left lane, you would be, with this bill, you would be prohibited from just driving out in the left lane.
Yeah, and this is something I think most of us have seen, and most of us shake our heads when it happens, seeing somebody just kind of hanging out in the left lane. And this is a law that would apply to everybody. Again, just a bill right now, right? Yeah. And they've tried this before, I think, as well, and it hasn't gone anywhere there in Florida, right?
Yeah, I mean, left lane use, that's, I don't want to say it's an annual topic there at the State House, but I mean, it's at least, for my purposes when I've been covering it, it seems as such. This particular effort that would just simply prohibit all drivers from just hanging out in the left lane, that was brought up here within the past year. And it advanced from committee, did not come up for a floor vote. Ultimately was hurt by the fact that the what is it? I believe the Department of Highways and Safety, motor vehicles there in Florida, said that there was confusion with the state's move over rule and how this change, could, I don't want to say affect, but people's understanding of, okay, how does this compare with the move over rule? Am I supposed to be getting over? And understandably so. I mean, yeah, that is an issue with a lot of states, is have a move over law. Okay, so I'm supposed to get over for emergency vehicles, but I'm not supposed to be hanging out in the left lane. Anyway, that essentially is what sidetracked the legislation from earlier this year. But again, looking to revisit that pursuit with some tweaks. Specifically, the biggest, I don't want to say the biggest revision from a year ago, but this newest pursuit for 2024 would, again, forbid any vehicle from continuous operation out in the left-hand lane of roadways that have speeds posted at least 65 miles per hour. So, not applying to all roadways, but in certain roadways, the fastest roadways there in the state of Florida, that rule would apply. Worth pointing out on those certain stretches of interstate where they have HOV lanes, this bill would clarify that if you're on a stretch of roadway that has an HOV lane, the furthest left-hand lane would be reclassified essentially as the lane closest to that HOV lane. So we'll see. We'll see if the legislature for 2024 feels that this newest effort is any clearer than what they had before.
Speaking of move over laws, which you mentioned there, we've got two states. One state actually looking at the issue, has looked at the issue and has a new law in effect. Another state looking at the issue and considering perhaps new rules there. Let's start with New York, where the governor has signed off on a new law regarding move over rules. What do those look like?
Yeah, earlier this summer, we talked about really the trend across the country, not only this year, but it kind of started last year with states making changes to their move over laws that have been in place for years in just about all cases. All states have a move over law. Who the protections apply to are different everywhere. Obviously, the focus, whenever this started to become popular in states, was to cover emergency vehicles. And then from that, the protections have expanded depending on what state you're in. But here in the past couple of years now, in New York, one of the latest states to make a revision that would apply the protections to all vehicles. So you don't have to be an emergency vehicle to have this protection apply to you. Fortunately, for truck drivers, they're included in this. And so definitely a needed revision that New York is kind of jumping on the bandwagon of states doing this. I think we've got around 20 states now that include all road users in their move over law. New York has done that, again, including all vehicles. Now, there is the requirement that if you're operating out on the roadway, you got to move over. If you can't move over, you got to slow down. Again, kind of the standard deal for move over protections. In New York, this new law, even though it's already been signed into law, it does not actually take effect until March. So it's still a few months away there from this rule being applicable, applying to all road users in New York.
You mentioned the number of states growing that are taking measures on this issue. Ohio may be joining them. There's a bill there, I believe, right now that's being considered and would do much the same.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out some of the states that are making revisions that apply to all vehicles have this distinguishment that this Ohio bill does. This is a bill that's in the Ohio Senate, and it says that you would be required to move over for any vehicle, any stationary vehicle that is quote unquote in distress. And how would you distinguish a vehicle that's in distress? In the legislation, it says, if a vehicle that's got flares or red lights or reflectors or red flags, any type of flashing emergency hazard lights, just essentially anything that you're saying to the those drivers that are passing, that, hey, I've got an issue. That would be considered to be a vehicle in distress. And then the protection would apply to those vehicles. I think the thought here is that you would have someone around the vehicle that just wouldn't be maybe a quote-unquote abandoned vehicle. But yeah, this is what Ohio is trying to pursue themselves.
We'll keep an eye on that. Keith, pleasure as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was Keith Goble of Landline Magazine, and this was Landline Now. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.